What's that?
Whether it'll be fully resurfaced or whether we'll...
Yeah, and it's ADA and sidewalk.
All right.
That's why.
Great, thank you. I don't care. No, I don't care. All right, we need a motion to come back into open session. So, moved by Alderman Painter, seconded by Alderman Wombley, and roll call.
Alderman Bray,
Yes.
Alderman Matthey,
Yes.
Alderman Sage,
Yes.
Alderman Malamoy,
Yes.
Alderman Burgess,
Yes.
Alderman Painter,
Yes.
Alderman Schmidt,
Yes.
Alderman Black.
Yes.
Okay, so we're turning our attention to the sanitary sewer and stormwater rates. David, did you want to kick us off?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. This is a continuation of prior discussions on the sanitary sewer and stormwater portions of our capital improvement plan. I appreciate and acknowledge the hard work of our Public Works Director and his staff, together with Patty Lynn Silva, the Finance Department, in putting together for your review tonight a very specific proposal for addressing our sewer and stormwater needs over the next 20 years, which is very directly, and I think integrated with the stormwater and sanitary sewer master plan. I just want to say before we get into the detail that keep in mind one of our objectives in bringing this to you tonight is also to see if we can achieve some sort of direction from the council whether or not this particular rate increase proposal is something you find acceptable. We have prepared a draft ordinance. And keep in mind, without a increase in either one or both of these fees, we really have a minimal sanitary sewer and stormwater capital improvement plan for the next 5 years. And I think we've demonstrated and showed that to you. But that being said, this is one component of that 5-year CIP to hopefully incorporate in that document an aggressive, proactive rate increase that will help us make meaningful and very significant progress on our sewer and stormwater needs, not over the next 5 years, but over the next 20 years. And last but not least, I have asked staff to keep in mind that they have provided you with a lot of written information, so we're going to keep our presentation short. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 minutes at the most. We want to avoid being redundant, and hopefully you've had a chance to review this. We want to leave as much time as possible for your questions of staff, and then ultimate direction, how you want to proceed at the conclusion of this portion of our meeting tonight. So with that, I'll ask Jim Karch, Public Works Director, to come forward, and then however you're going to also utilize Patty Lynn Silva, as needed. So please proceed. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, City Manager Hales. Mayor Pro Tem and City Council, again, we are before you to talk about sanitary and storm sewer. This is a topic that we've been discussing for 5 years. In 2012, we started a master plan. It was completed, adopted in 2015. We did a rate study, and so we are just continuing that dialogue. One of the important facets tonight is we are trying to find a way to reasonably move the ball forward so we can have a plan to be able to address our underground infrastructure. It is one of those topics that is hard because it's under the surface. It's hard to see People just flush their toilet, assume everything goes away. You assume in your backyard that the water, whenever it rains, will be conveyed away. But the problem is we've been underfunded in this community for a long time. This is not an issue that is recent. This is an issue that has taken many decades to get to this point. We just want to make sure that we do not drop the ball moving forward. And so we're asking tonight for some additional direction on moving forward. We've laid the case out, I believe, over the past few years for this need. I think many of you as aldermen have seen what kind of issues we've had. Each of your wards has been affected. Each of you, I've had to tell you no many times that we can't address this need because we just don't have the resources to deal with it. Our master plan calls for $136 million over the next 20 years. That is a lot of money, but what we will look at is how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? We cannot generate $136 million today, but we are trying to say over a 20-year period, how do we have proper things in place, practices, policies, procedures, so that our staff can be able to address our infrastructure need. One thing I'd like to talk about first is that let's address the issue of general fund versus enterprise. I think that's a key differentiation I'd really like to stress for the council. Some people will say, why can't you pay for this with the existing property tax, sales tax revenue? It's important to note that sewers, both sanitary and storm, are both separate enterprise funds. They are user fee based. The services that come out of it they happen because of the rates that are paid by people on a monthly basis. So whenever you take water into your house, that generates how much money you then pay on sanitary sewer. So it's based depending upon how much you use. So it's a user-based system. Same thing with stormwater. Your stormwater rate is dependent upon how much impervious area is on your property. The bigger the property, the more that you pay. And so again, these are user-based systems that drive the ability for us to provide the service. And so that's why we can't just ignore this. These rates have been, we'll talk about that in a little bit, they've been frozen, some of them, and no movement forward since 2004. This is a breakdown of the master plan. What does the master plan call for? In each of the different areas, asset management, stormwater, sanitary, each of those has different staffing, different total dollars that are required. We'll break that down for you in just a little bit. But one of the things we don't talk a lot about is that asset management. You'll hear me talk about that in terms of televising the sewers and rating the sewers. That's that asset management piece, the geographic information system piece. We talk about how important that is. Here's what I was mentioning to you. In 2004, that was the last time we started the stormwater rate fee. It hasn't been changed since then. There's been no changes in the sanitary sewer fees since 2012. And so the problems that we have are very basic. They're just coming to where we are not able to address the fundamental maintenance items that we have. I even used the example in stormwater that there's Marion Street Detention Basin has some very significant issues that have to be addressed. We're having to deal with that with a sewer maintenance contract that isn't even supposed to deal with it, but we've got no other way to handle it. So the problem is right now is our staff is just pointing fire extinguishers at the largest fires, and we cannot, as a community of this size that wants to move things forward, maintain what we're doing with the service level we're at. So we look at what kind of capital projects, just as the city manager pointed out, all of this ties in with our capital improvement plans. I've tried to talk about it before, but let me say this. With our resurfacing, we know people talk about our streets, but we as a staff, I'll give our staff just a ton of credit. They have tried to make sure, we've talked about anytime you resurface a street, you line the sewer, you make sure the sewer, the water, everything is okay. And so in this case, we are coming up against the point where we don't have enough televised and lined to where we can really keep up with an ongoing resurfacing program. So we're going to get to the point here, probably even this next year, but definitely the following year, where we do not have enough sewers that are in good enough shape for us to resurface, and me tell you that that is still a service level we're providing. So what we talk about, let's talk about the downtown. Downtown Bloomington, there's been a lot of focus on our downtown, and so we ask the question, what is the infrastructure like in the downtown? Well, what I'd like to tell you is we actually have lined 3,870 feet of sewer in the downtown. That's great. We spent $395,000 on the downtown lining sewers. Now, unfortunately, though, I need to tell you that we have about 8,300 feet that still needs to be lined. So we've lined 3,870 feet, and we still have 8,300 feet to go. go. We're estimating in the range of $600,000 to $700,000 to line what needs to be done in the downtown that's still left to go. We don't have the funds to do that. And so, as we talk about the need to make that the cornerstone of a lot of what we're doing in this community, there really has to also be a focus on that infrastructure from the ground up. And so that's important to discuss. So let's talk about, we've hit this before too, but right now we are being reactive as a staff. Well, just being transparent, we are not doing preventative maintenance as we should. And it is common practice for us to know it is cheaper for us to be proactive than reactive. We've made that case to you multiple times using different examples such as Douglas Street and others. But we've tried to lay that case out. I think as a council, you are firmly understanding of that. But let's talk about other issues. We talked about with sanitary sewer, we really have to inspect and continue to expand our lining program. We only have 13% of our sanitary sewers televised and rated. A community of our size with the age of sewer that we have, that is very difficult, unacceptable really for myself. And I think about the importance of stewardship. That is not to the level that we like. With our stormwater, we have issues all the time with our sump pump drain line program. There's 11 different places in town. Mercer was one where that was on the front page of the paper that there's water issues, and we said, yes, there's very much a need for a sump pump drain line. There's been nothing that's happened since that front page story. We, as a staff, acknowledge, yes, there's absolutely need there, but we have no funds to be able to address it. We have other areas through town drainage ways that have significant erosion. We have 73 public detention basins that have no maintenance that we're doing on a regular basis. And those are not going to get better. That only gets worse when you don't do that. There's staffing that happens as part of this. The master plan addresses that. So we have a 5-year plan to be able to ramp that up. It's not just an in-house staff. We also have a hybrid, a comparable outsourcing and insourcing type of thing. Whenever you ramp up this much project, you have to be able to address what kind of staffing needs are there as well. So what kind of rate increases are we looking at? There's a couple different ways that we could try to deal with these issues. What we tried to do as a staff, and city manager was very supportive of this, we said, how do we over a 20-year period be able to show that the rate increases that will happen will deal with the 20-year master plan that the council approved? So that was the goal that we had in mind. And again, as the city manager pointed out, a lot of credit to our finance department. We really appreciate Patty Lynn and her staff. We ran a lot of different scenarios. And so it is a team effort, and we're really thankful for the partnership. What we try to do is we said, what would be a reasonable, over 5 years, ramp up the costs on a monthly basis. So if every year you did an 11.6% increase for 5 years, and then after that 3% ongoing, for our sanitary sewer. That's a very simple number for us to be able to get our hands around, 11.6% a year. What that would do is over a 20-year period, that would generate the amount needed for us to be able to fund the master plan. So you can see another way to look at that is over the 5-year period, that's a 73% increase from now 5 years later. So it's not doubling. One of the things we talked about before was, and the city manager even suggested it, if we need to double it, we need to double it. But what we're suggesting is that we're actually able to be under that. And so I know that the town of Normal actually had some aggressive rate increases where they were looking to double where they're at. For us, we're trying to say we have to get to a point where we can have a sustainable program. One downside with this program, I do want to point out, this doesn't generate the money where next year we're able to address all the issues. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. This is a ramped up period so you won't see the same improvements really what we're saying is that until year 8, that's where you're really going to start seeing the dollars that are coming in, the projects are rolling in. We'll start seeing much more increase in the early short term for things like lining and the facets that we have to get in place. But those big projects, we have to allow for that to be able to get ramped up until we can do those things. We'll look with finance on what we can do in the short term, possibly with financing to deal with what we have from that standpoint. But really the goal of this program is to be kind of a cash for capital. That's a term I really liked, Patty Lynn Silva came up with. This is intended to be a cash for capital type of program. We should be able to use this and pay for the projects as they come up. But we just have to be patient. We won't be able to address it in year 1. When we look at how this affects our typical customers with stormwater rates, it's an 8.2% increase over the next 5 years, and then 3% ongoing. And so again, this is a 48% increase over a 5-year period. And so again, our goal as a staff is to try to find a way to, not have a huge jump in price right away, allow people to work into it over a multi-year period. But again, you balance that with the ability to get projects done quickly. With that being said, we'd like to entertain any questions, try to keep the presentation to a minimum.
Alderman Matthew.
Jim, you said this gets us through all the projects that were on a list for the capital improvement plan and the master plan stuff. I'm assuming, does that include just regular ongoing maintenance of things we've already done at the same time?
It does. The master plan addresses both capital and also maintenance.
Okay.
It
So at
does.
the end of 20 years, we're on a sustainable path forward, is what you're saying?
Yes, we are. What we're providing to you right now allows for us to have a sustainable infrastructure for sewers. But what I will say is that 5 to 8 year time frame is when you'll start really seeing you start seeing the scales tip. It won't be year one that you see everything get fixed.
Okay. I just want to make sure that ongoing maintenance was part of it too, so.
Alderman Bray.
So question here about the 5-year, the phased-in approach. So you're favoring a phased-in approach to get us to the fees that are necessary to get the work done. What is the driver for a phased-in approach versus we need double the amount of money?
Sure.
And so we just double the rate. Explain to me the philosophy or the reasoning behind a phased-in versus an immediate calculation for what these services really cost.
Really, I'll be honest, that's really more of a political decision. It really is a governance decision by our council of how do we quickly do we want to see these results. One is more palatable for citizens. They get to see, change, allow themselves to budget over time, but then the downside is there's a lot of need out there right now, we'll say. And so we will not be able, we'll still be fighting, behind the 8 ball for a few years.
So building off of that, if we said, well, we'd like to see some real changes here in the next 24 months,
Yes.
Are there any capability obstacles?
No. If the council, if that's the desire that we have the majority of council supportive of that, we would work with finance to be able to do more of a quick 1 or 2 year type ramp up to that level, and then again back off at that point and just have the ongoing maintenance and be sustainable. So that's the kind of direction that we're really looking for tonight.
Thank you.
If I can just add too, that as long as, we have the revenue projection showing the revenue increasing, we can borrow money up front, and then we could use that stepped-up approach to pay off those bonds in accordance with maybe the availability of revenue. So yes, it doesn't preclude borrowing and having a modified debt service schedule
Accurate.
to correspond with this increase over 5-6 years.
That's true. Correct.
Alderman Painter, and then Wamba, and then Burgess. I've been thinking along the same lines as Alderman Bray. I'm wondering, in 20 years, I'm just concerned that we'll never get it done if we're looking at 20 years out. We are so far behind now that something really drastic needs to be done. And I'm thinking that, maybe people would have a better taste for saying, look, this has to be paid for, and raise the fees over a 3-year period to pay for it. You would save on interest. You would save because you would be able to contract out for big jobs. And, at the end of the day, we could possibly get it done in 5 to 8 years. I think that would possibly be a better way to go. Just my opinion. Thanks.
Alderman Mwambwe.
Okay. Let me see. Now, does this take into account any of the efficiencies that people might realize over time in 20 years in terms of water consumption? Because that's what we're relying on.
with the sewer rates specifically, because that's where it is water consumption driven. That actually does. Whenever we looked at Raft-Tillis, they did the sewer rate study for the city. They build into their model is actually a very complicated Excel spreadsheet that dealt with even water consumption and some of the practices. It was a pretty extensive spreadsheet, very impressive.
Okay. And does this also take into account kind of a reserve type of system so that we have money along the way just in case we had, emergencies and, just like Alderman Matthew was saying, regular maintenance so that we're not always operating in crisis mode. That's what I find a little bit annoying, that we...
So do we.
Yeah.
It does not, and the reason for it is because of the slow ramp up. There's not a lot of funds that are able to be put aside. We're really in years 1 through 5, we are using every dollar that we get to be able to try to deal with still that reactive mode to try to get ahead, just to get to where you're kind of getting to the point. We want to be proactive about year 8. We'd like to start between years 5 and 8. We really want to start getting to the point where we as a staff can be proactive like we should be and want to be.
Thank you.
Alderman Burgess.
One of the hypotheticals you put out was, when do we want these projects to be done? And I think if we talk to the individuals in the community who are most impacted by our failure to keep up with this infrastructure needs, they would say yesterday.
Yes, they do.
It needed to be done then because our need is so large and so imminent. And so two of the other concepts you've talked about, and others now have too, really appeal to me. Number one is proactive instead of reactive. And the longer we phase this in, the longer we are reactive instead of proactive, and we know that will cost us more money. In the long run, we will get less for our money. The other is this idea of cash for capital. I like that phrase because borrowing money has an expense associated with it. I would like to avoid that when we can. I mean, obviously we can't always, and we can leverage that to great benefit to the community, but I think that in terms of getting this done more quickly and with being, more cash for capital and more proactive instead of reactive, I would very much support that.
If we were able to do a 2 or 3 year ramp up, that really would allow for staff to be able to do more of that cash for capital type program. And we would then be quicker on, instead of the 8-year time frame, that really would bump us being more proactive on, year 4 type thing. That really would make a big difference, but it really would ramp things up quicker.
Alderman Sage.
Thank you. David, I want to follow up a little bit on your comment about as long as the projected revenue streams are in place, you can leverage that if you will. And so does that mean that if for example, there was some consensus to say, well, let me just say for me, I mean, for me, 5 years is the absolute shortest that I would be willing to support, and that's going to even take a little bit more conversation for me. But if we were to stretch it out to say 8 years, in order to have the smaller percentage increase for people who really do live almost from month to month, are we still then able to borrow that money up front, recognizing that we'd have interest charges and stuff, but in effect, kind of get the maybe some part of the best of both worlds with smaller monthly increases for our residents, but also have access to that money to perhaps get a jump start in years 1, 2, and 3. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, and let me have Patty come up, but just keep in mind that the city can always structure how it's going to repay that debt. And in doing that structure, it can say, okay, for the first 5 or 6 years, we're going to start out with smaller repayments, annual repayments, and maybe it's more interest up front, and then later on we start increasing the principal. So there's a lot of adjustments or modifications we can make on the annual debt service, especially in the beginning. You don't always have that flexibility in a home mortgage because everything is a fixed annual debt service. So anything else, Patty, you might want to add in connection with that question?
I would just say the short answer is yes. We can issue debt. It can buy you time in raising those rates.
Now, you got to keep in mind, too, there is trade-offs, you know. You
There's
do
trade-offs,
add to
yeah.
the interest costs
sure.
when you begin to do that. That's why you don't want to string it out any longer than you have to. But, you know, for the first 5 years, especially if I think for these types of long-term assets, it could reasonably be a 20-year repayment term, 25, even 30 years.
Easily,
Yeah.
yeah. Easily. It just depends on how you want to structure that debt and what, you know, is it level debt service, is it not, is it wraparound technique to when we have other debt paying off and that kind of thing. But, you know, that is the benefit to kind of, to your point, Kim, is, you know, when you phase in, it's a softer on the residents, but at the same time, it allows you to look at your finances. Every year you'll budget for this fund, like we do, and those discussions can happen. Hey, this is the amount of revenue we're projecting this year. Would we we have a big project coming up. Do we want to save for that? Do we want to issue some debt? You know, how do we want to do that? So the phased-in approach does at least give you that year-to-year opportunity, because the further you go out, although these are very, very, very good numbers, the further you go out, the softer things can get. And, you know, we don't know what we don't know in terms of a 20-year plan and some major catastrophic thing happening. But I would say that, you know, you can it allows you to be creative either way. Cash for capital is a wonderful thing. We have a lot of other needs and a lot of other areas where we may not have cash for capital. So this is an opportunity to kind of put cash away for capital where you may have to incur debt in other areas such as facilities or general taxation where there is no money really for capital. So.
And if I can make one other comment too, I think it's important, and as Jim mentioned, yes, that the primary revenue source in these enterprise funds should be the fees and service charges. But that doesn't mean that has to be an absolute rule. Next week, when we talk about a limited potential bond for street resurfacing, one of the recommendations we're going to throw out is that if something like that is pursued, something like a $20 million street resurfacing bond, we would also, or one option is to have the general tax revenue of the city help to pay off the debt service for the underground utility portion. So we just need to always kind of keep in mind the bulk of the revenue in whether it be the water fund, sanitary sewer, stormwater, really should be paid back or paid for by those fees. But keep in mind that we only started some of these fees, you know, like stormwater, not that long ago. And what happened before then? General tax revenue was making those payments. So that's still one of those options. And if I could, just one other thing, Patty, if I'm looking at this information, I think it's helpful because this will be a question that I think people will bring up. I'm looking at the sanitary sewer numbers, and when we add the consumption fee and fixed fee, currently we're bringing in approximately $4.7 million, Jim, if I'm right, in sanitary sewer fee revenue. One of the questions is going to be asked, well, okay, how are we spending that $4.7 million today? The bulk of that is, you know, really going to pay for maintenance costs, the day-to-day maintenance. Unfortunately, over time, some of those maintenance costs have continued to grow, leaving less a portion or that can really go for capital costs. Now, over time, what we want to continue to do is always make sure we're very open, transparent with the public so we can show that for the total revenue, and as it grows from 4.7 to 8.1 million, what's the percentage and the dollar amount going to maintenance? What's the percentage and dollar amount going to capital? That's one of the things we want to keep stressing. You know, we've got to come up with a source of new revenue to fund these capital improvements. Stormwater, as I saw, I think that annual number today is, 2.8 million? Do I have that right? You know, and that's not a lot of money, but keep in mind it wasn't that long ago, even when the fee was put in there, we didn't have a stormwater master plan. We couldn't even say, you know, what the true needs were in the stormwater. Now, unfortunately, with a master plan, we've identified. quite a lot. So, but as that grows to 4.1, we'll want in our aggressive, robust communication plan to our ratepayers, continue to share with them how are we using that increase? What progress are we making on a year-to-year basis? How are we getting closer to those ultimate targets, of having, what is it? Let's see, I think if you were to take a guess, you mentioned how many, lineal feet we've lined, but totally we probably will end up with how many miles that probably could or should be lined. Just enough yet. Just take a wild guess.
No, the master plan recommends 4 miles a year.
Yeah,
And
4
so,
miles a
if
year.
you just even round it to, 20,000 miles, 21,000 miles a year. It's 21,000 feet a year. That's quite a bit of lining that we have to do.
That
And with
would
us
be
having
a total-
13% completed, you can see kind of a range of how much we have done.
And that would probably mean, about 80 total miles?
Of sewer, we have
sewers in
400,
20 years.
400 miles of sewer total in the city, and so what I think you're getting,
Yeah.
4 miles a year
Yeah.
is what we're looking to line and televise and line a year is really where we should be at.
So. But I'll stop at that, but those are some additional things. We haven't mentioned that communication plan, but that is so critical that the ratepayers understand why we can't live within the means now, and then how is this going to affect each year the progress we're making for these long-term targets and goals.
The last item to stress is just before you as a council, and then there are some in the back, there's also a packet of what kind of capital projects we are looking to complete with this. It's always important to know, so that's for you as well.
Jim, could you please go back to the slide that shows FTE adding staff, and could you speak about how that fits in with either one of these two scenarios, and thinking about adding people to our payroll and our pension and
Absolutely.
that whole part of that?
One of the aspects that the master plan addresses is over a 20-year period, they actually recommend 9.5 staff, 9.75 actually, staff to be added to allow for the ability to be able to maintain and also manage the contracts, to manage the work that's done, do the inspection, because right now whenever there's no inspection being done, let me give you the example of the detention basins. Whenever we go back now to the specific like people that would be brought on. Whenever you look at the first year, for example, let's talk about fiscal year 19. So if the rates were increased as being currently requested, we would have an engineering technician to be able to do the proper inspections of the detention basins, to be able to deal with the sump pump drain lines. You'd have the civil engineer that could manage the contracts for the lining. There's a lot of the staff that deals with the ramp up as we ramp up capital to have the ability to have staff that can maintain that. From a streets and sewers perspective, we actually have a need for a dedicated crew to be able to just do maintenance on our basins. Out of those 73, we need the ability to inspect and do the work out on those basins. And so that's what we're looking for.
So, and let me understand about both sanitary sewer and stormwater. Some of that is handled by companies that are not, that we're doing an RFP to.
Correct.
And some of it is internal work.
Currently, the city has a hybrid type system. We do some work internally with our own employees, and then we also outsource some of that work as well. And so there always will be a balance. Every community has that. But what we are looking at is trying to make sure we have enough to be able to just maintain even some of that internal work that we have.
Thank you. Alderman Bray and Alderman Sage, and then I think we need to, or Matthew, I'm sorry, and then I think we need to give some direction to Mr. Hales.
Just a quick question in regards to the minimum charges. In our report, there was something about the minimums that are charged to folks. What is the basis of the minimum?
So with the minimum charge, what you have is, let's say with the sanitary sewer, there is a consumption charge, and then there also is a charge that no matter whether you have a zero use or not, there's also a administration cost and the ability to just have the system for
Fixed fee
Yes.
is the term you're using.
Correct. That's correct.
Thank you.
So yes, that's what that's there for.
Alderman Matthew and then Alderman Black.
So I got a couple questions today referring to, in the packet, there's a line here that says property owners who make certain stormwater accommodations can qualify for credits up to 50%.
Yes.
I got multiple people saying asking for details on that. Is that something you could just email out to us?
Absolutely.
And we could get to...
That's on our website right now, and we'll email that out to the council, a link to that.
Okay, thank you.
Can you just clarify, does that really pertain to the typical single-family home?
Doesn't. It's, for example, like
Or
Oakwood
commercial.
subdivision with the PUD, to where they have a private detention basin that accommodates like detention. So that what they do is they're able to have privately maintained and owned detention. If it qualifies, they can reduce the stormwater fees for their residents up to a certain amount, and we have all those formulas out there.
Alderman Black?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Jim. This one I'm struggling with, and I'm just reflecting on being up here for the last few years and the times that we've reviewed the revenue and made appropriate adjustments that we saw fit at the time. And we're not talking a lot of money here. We're talking a small monthly increase. Many folks won't notice it. But I can't help but think about some of the homes in West Bloomington, historic Bloomington, whose water bill is higher than the value of their property tax for the city. And this is one of those existence taxes that we have to grapple with. I always like to, when we talk about revenue adjustments, we like to focus on things that people can have some measure of control over. It's very tough for me to swallow this one, because this is going to, people are going to feel this one, at least in historic Bloomington, that I can see. And is it truly fair for the entire community to absorb some of these costs through these types of fees, as opposed to, say, some things that are more proportional to income and those sorts of things. So I guess when we talked about some of the road, my question is this: when we talked about the road bond a couple years ago, we looked at the economic impact that comes along with redoing streets, making them more accessible, et cetera. I was looking through the material here. I didn't see a whole lot of conversation about the economic impact, the benefits of redoing sewers. And is there a way to quantify that we can point to that says if we put X amount of dollars in more, it's going to generate Y amount of X plus 50%, X plus 10%, whatever that number might be over time?
Very briefly, with economic development period, you can talk about what increases it, but I can tell you what decreases it. And a non-functioning sewer is one of those basic things will be an economic killer.
Yeah.
And so you have to deal with the basic services for every property, and that's really where we're at. As a community, since the 1800s, we have sewers that are just dying out there that we have to maintain. And in our older parts of the community, especially, there's a real cry out of cave-ins and issues where people have backups that we really have a need. And so it's just a matter of how do we deal with that.
Absolutely, and you're right, and one can't miss mentioning wildcat sewers, which continue to plague our historic neighborhood. So the list of challenges is long, but we'll have to find a way to make that work. And I'm going to do some reflecting on this one, because this is a little different than the things that we've talked about in the past, and how we go about funding these.
I wish this were more fun. I wish this were a better, easier thing you can see when it was done. But.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
So in terms of direction to Mr. Hales, I'm hearing at least some interest in something that's ramped up and maybe seeing what those numbers look like to compare or not. Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
And
If it would be okay, we could bring back at the next time multiple options based upon what we've heard for the council to consider at the next meeting, if city manager thinks that's a good approach.
we could do that, and again, I think one simple question is, would you like more time just for general discussion of this topic before voting, or sooner or later, I think the best way to get a majority direction is going to be to vote on one or or other.
That's right.
And that's why I was thinking that at least in 2 weeks, we can bring that, this ordinance forward. We could have some other options, but, and again, another topic might be, well, maybe now is not the time.
I don't think.
Preferably, that's not the case. But, we are taking this somewhat separate and apart from the annual operating budget. But if we were to ask you to approve the 5-year CIP today, you're going to have a bare bones, hardly minimal sanitary sewer and stormwater. And that's what I'm assuming the council doesn't want to do,
Right.
But, still, you have indicated you do want to vote on and get approved a 5-year CIP this year. In fact, I think we're maybe 6 months behind
Right.
what you had hoped for last fall.
We're running out of time here, Alderman Matthew and Sage.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I didn't hear overwhelming support for anything past 5 years, as I suggested. So without that, I would say I don't know that I'd invest the time in looking at something beyond 5 years. I will probably not be able to support anything, unless it's beyond 5 years. But again, I didn't hear support for that, so I would concentrate on the 5-year and the whatever ramp-up period
timeframe.
that it's been.
Alderman Matthew?
I was just going to say, last time we talked about water rates, and I would like to see it all on one chart, right? And so, as opposed to looking
The
at
full
them as
impact.
separate. Yeah, because
Yeah.
that's what people are going to get their monthly bills, and that's what we're looking at, the evaluating. So I think that all those fees should all be in one chart so we could evaluate which way we're going to go.
Yeah, I would support that too. So I think seeing our options and being able to have an informed vote based on those would be helpful.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you both very much too. And we are reconvening in 2 minutes. Thank you. Do we need a motion to adjourn? Moved by Alderman Black. Second by Alderman Painter. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?